Every Thanksgiving, my husband vanished for 3 hours, no more, no less, and that single certainty is the hinge on which my whole life swung. It sounds harmless written in ink, almost quaint, like a quirk a woman might laugh about over coffee, yet even harmless things repeated become scratches on glass. Faint at first, then spider webbing until the whole pane shatters at a breath. I was 26 in November 1969, still young enough to think heartache, obeyed etiquette, old enough to bristle when my name, Evelyn Harper, was spoken with pitying softness. Roxbury, Boston, was my compass. Warren Street Baptist on Sundays, Blue Hill Avenue markets on Saturdays, the hum of gospel and the crackle of frying fish threading weekday dusk. Our clapboard house sat 2 blocks from Nubian Square, painted the color of sunshine a child might draw. Inside, lace curtains filtered morning light onto waxed floors. Outside, our yard smelled of thyme and boxwood because Mama said a home needed its own signature. My husband, Calvin Brooks, thought selling cars on Commonwealth Avenue an art form. He wore suits sharp enough to slice bread and a smile just as bright. Women in choir lofts called him steady. Men at the barber shop called him slick. And for a while I wore both compliments like matching earrings. Thanksgiving prep was my liturgy. Monday, soak the collard greens. Tuesday, cube the day-old cornbread for dressing. Wednesday, slow cook sweet yams in brown sugar syrup until the kitchen fogged like a steam engine. By dawn Thursday, a 20-pound turkey would already be butter beneath the skin, sliding into the oven with a hiss that sounded to me like applause. I moved through those chores the way a conductor lifts a baton, certain every note would land. Yet each year at 2 p.m., Calvin would tug his keys from the dish on the hall table, lean in close, always the left cheek, never the right, and murmur, "Big client, baby." Only I can seal the deal. He'd stride out whistling, leaving the front door ajar so cold air slipped under my hem. At 5 p.m. sharp, he'd return with apologies, charm, and a scent of vanilla tobacco that wasn't his usual bay rum. Guests never noticed. Turkey erased many sins. But I did notice, and noticing is the first betrayal a woman commits against her own denial. What fractures faster, the trust you place in a husband or the trust you place in your own eyes? The first year, I dismissed the pattern. The second, I confessed it to my reflection but to no living soul. The third, I prayed harder, because prayer was cheaper than confrontation. Still, something thin and persistent pressed behind my ribs, the way children press noses to candy store glass. It whispered, "Watch," and so I watched. His ties changed color, crimson instead of navy, silk instead of wool. His jokes referenced restaurants we'd never visited. His briefcase smelled of French perfume. On the Sunday before Thanksgiving 1969, Reverend Carter preached on secrets, how a hidden rot hollows a tree long before its trunk creaks. I sang alto in the choir loft, eyes on my hymnal, throat tight as a fist. When he said, "Be sure your sin will find you out," Calvin's head did not move, but his knuckles whitened on the pew. Nobody saw but me. That whiteness traveled straight into my chest and stayed there like unfinished business. If a single Sunday sermon can plant dynamite in a marriage, imagine what a Thursday revelation can detonate. I decided, quietly, stubbornly, that this would be the last Thanksgiving mystery. Whatever lay behind my husband's punctual absences, I would trace it like thread through cloth until the pattern showed. And once you resolve to see, the universe tilts to grant you witnesses. My youngest brother, Darius, arrived from Baltimore on Tuesday night carrying 2 suitcases and the reckless loyalty of an 18-year-old. He hugged me, stepped back, and said, "Sis, why you looking at that turkey like it owes you money?" I laughed too loudly, poured him sweet tea, and told him nothing. But Darius had grown up watching me read him bedtime stories with half my attention, other half tuned to adult murmurs down the hall, so he knew the posture of concealed worry. Wednesday morning, as I basted the turkey, I noticed gaps on the gift shelf in our hall closet. Mama's hand-crocheted shawl, gone. The houndstooth scarf I'd knit for my sister Lorraine, missing. A velvet box of cufflinks for Daddy, vanished. I'd wrapped them 2 weeks earlier. Now the shelf looked like a mouth with teeth knocked out. My pulse thudded in my ears harder than the mixmaster whipping yam filling. I confronted Calvin at breakfast. "You seen the gifts?" "I can't find 'em." He barely looked up from the globe. "Probably misplaced, Steve. You know holidays. Scatterbrained." He winked, folded the paper, kissed my forehead. Vanilla tobacco drifted from his collar. That scent scraped something raw inside me. Have you ever felt a single fragrance unravel the seams of an entire life? By noon, Darius cornered me near the back porch. "Sis, you shaking gravy like maracas, what gives?" I tried brushing him off, but he gripped my elbow gently. In that grip, I felt every childhood secret we'd shared, how he'd trusted me with nightmares, how I'd trusted him with ambitions, and my resolve cracked. I told him everything in a whisper. The 3-hour disappearances, the missing gifts, the perfume. His face hardened from youth to steel. Thanksgiving Day dawned clear and cold. Sunlight bounced off frost on the sedan, making it wink like mischief. Inside, the house smelled of garlic, rosemary, and brewing confrontation. Family bustled in. Cousins balancing pies, Aunt Marcia hoisting a pot of greens big enough to baptize a baby. Calvin moved among them smooth as ever, carving ham, telling jokes, pocketing compliments. But at 1:55 p.m., he glanced at his watch, eyes flicking toward the door. "Client time," he said at 1:58. At exactly 2, he exited. Buick engine purring down Warren Street. Darius appeared beside me in the hallway, coat in hand. "Keys," he said. We borrowed Cousin Leonard's Ford, a dented old thing that coughed awake but held its temper. I drove. Darius navigated with calm urgency. Calvin's Buick glided through downtown, past Common Park, bare elms scratching a gray sky, then north toward Beacon Hill, where brick townhouses stood shoulder to shoulder like secrets in a lineup. He parked outside a 3-story brownstone with black shutters and a brass knocker. We eased half a block back and killed the engine. I felt my heartbeat in my fingertips. From the trunk, Calvin lifted 4 parcels wrapped in gold tissue, Mama's shawl unmistakable beneath the ribbon. He carried them up the stoop. A child, curly-haired, flung the door open, squealing, "Daddy!" My stomach lurched. Behind her, a woman in burgundy appeared, laughter dying when she saw Calvin's arms overflowing with gifts. He kissed her cheek with practiced tenderness. Picture the moment you realize the love you're witnessing belongs not to you but to someone who wears your husband's face. I opened the car door. Darius caught my wrist. "You sure?" I nodded, throat a furnace. Steps felt heavier than any choir robe. The woman opened the door wider and Calvin stepped inside. I reached the stoop just as he set Mama's shawl on an antique settee. My shadow crossed the threshold. He spun, and color drained from his cheeks. "Calvin," I said, voice steady because the storm had passed into ice. "Introduce me." The woman frowned. "I'm Selena. You must be—" "Evelyn, wife." 2 words, sharp as snapped guitar strings. Selena's eyes widened. "He said he was a widower." Behind her, the little girl clutched Calvin's pant leg, confusion puckering her brow. Dimples. His dimples branded her cheeks. Lineage mocked me in miniature. Silence sucked oxygen from the room until Calvin finally croaked, "Eve, We can discuss. No, I interrupted. We will distribute. I turned to Selena. He'll remove his belongings from my home tomorrow. Yours too, so choose wisely. To the girl, I whispered, none of this is your fault, baby. She hid behind her mother's skirt. Selena's shoulders squared. Mr. Brooks, get out! Calvin stepped onto the stoop. In the doorway's shadow, his grandeur shrank. I watched him descend the steps, parcelless, speechless, manless. Darius started the Ford. I inhaled December air so cold it burned and tasted like rebirth. We drove home under a sky the color of bruised plums. Inside the Ford's cab, silence wasn't empty. It brimmed with clashing thoughts. Regret elbowed relief, humiliation gnawed at rage, and somewhere beneath it all, a tiny seed of anticipation pulsed. What now? When I finally spoke, my voice sounded older. Pull round back, Dar. Guests don't need to see. In the kitchen, relatives laughed over dominoes, unaware the hostess had returned a different woman. While dishes clinked, I climbed the stairs to Calvin's study. I dusted that mahogany desk every Saturday, never opening its drawers because trust is a habit you polish like silver. Tonight, habit cracked. Bottom drawer, receipts for jewelry I'd never worn. Middle drawer, 2 ledgers, one neat, one sloppy, columns of numbers that didn't match. Top drawer, a battered shoebox containing a safe deposit key, bank logo I didn't recognize. My breath hitched, but curiosity outran fear. I slipped the key into my apron pocket, then noticed a floor safe hidden beneath an oriental rug, ironic flourish for a man who thought deceit best concealed under luxury. Combination dial shone. I considered searching for the code, but instinct tugged me downstairs. Calvin kept habits, after all. In the pantry sat his grandmother's Bible. He claimed reading scripture kept him humble. I opened it. Inside back cover, a 6-digit number penned in his tidy script beside Proverbs 6. Can a man scoop fire into his lap without his clothes being burned? Poetry of irony. Back upstairs, the combination clicked open. Inside lay 3 folders. Forged invoices bearing my fake signature, a stack of blank Roxbury bank checks, and policy papers naming Calvin sole beneficiary to a life insurance plan I never signed. My knees wobbled, the room blurred. He hadn't just lied. He'd mapped a future in which my absence doubled his assets. What stings more? The lover who betrays you in secret or the partner who plans your erasure on paper? I gathered every document, slid them into a manila envelope, sealed it with tape that screeched like a warning. Then I made 3 smaller envelopes, one for his dealership manager, one for the IRS, and one addressed simply just in case, mailed to myself at the bookstore where I volunteered Tuesday evenings. Insurance, I'd call it. The righteous kind. Downstairs, cousins packed leftovers. Calvin's chair at the head of the table sat empty, cranberry glaze congealing on his untouched plate. Aunt Marcia asked, "He working late again, baby?" I smiled so widely my cheeks hurt. "Yes, ma'am, but work won't wait forever." The double meaning tasted like bitters and honey. At midnight, the house slept. I lay awake counting ceiling cracks, heartbeats synced to the grandfather clock. Calvin stumbled in at 12:03 a.m., smelling of rain and desperation. I stayed silent while he crept to the guest room. Our marriage bed had already rejected him. Morning frost etched silver veins across the porch railing where I'd stacked 2 suitcases and a cardboard box of his possessions. Nothing valuable, everything memorable. Wedding cufflinks, first anniversary watch, a shoe shine kit Papa gave him. Beside them, I balanced the ledgers, receipts, and a note. Return for these when you can explain them to the appropriate authorities. He took the luggage, left the papers. I watched through lace curtains as he loaded the Buick trunk, an atlas of his sins, and drove away. Something unclenched in my diaphragm. Space rushed in. Not emptiness, but possibility. Like the hush right after church when the benediction still hangs in the rafters. That afternoon, I met Darius at Nubian Square. We ate fried catfish from a street cart, grease-soaking brown paper, and plotted next steps the way generals might strategize near a battlefield they refuse to abandon. "You gonna burn him down?" Darius asked between bites. I shook my head. "No, baby brother, I'm gonna light my own way." When a woman chooses illumination over arson, her glow can blind every liar in the room. Calvin's dealership received an anonymous envelope Monday morning. The IRS, another. I waited, not for revenge, but for room to breathe. In that room, I saw avenues previously invisible. A tiny black-owned bookstore off Blue Hill Avenue, hiring part-time clerks. A community literacy program seeking volunteers. Boston University evening classes, offering scholarships to non-traditional students. I wasn't yet 30, but grief had aged me. Now freedom rolled years off my shoulders like shedding a winter coat in spring. Friday evening, as sunlight tilted amber across Nubian Station, a tall man with horn-rimmed glasses entered the bookstore. Dr. Nathan Price introduced himself, said he'd heard about my deft way with customers and my soft-spoken authority. He invited me to audit his class on African American literature. I almost declined. Women fresh from betrayal often confuse opportunity with danger. But something steadier than fear answered, yes. That yes birthed a future Calvin could never claim. 15 years later, in a graduation robe zipped over hips widened by time, I shook Dr. Price's hand, then held it a beat longer. The congregation of students cheered their classmates. My choir back in Roxbury cheered me across 6 pews of distance and decades of healing. Dr. Price became Professor Price, became Nathan, became husband. Our home filled with students who called me Auntie Eve, with neighbors who found shelter in our open porch, with nieces and nephews who grew literate on stories I placed in their palms. 2 decades after that fateful Thanksgiving, a package arrived. Mama's shawl, Lorraine's scarf, Daddy's cufflinks, and a strand of pearls I'd never seen. Selena's note said Calvin had passed, and before he died, he asked her to send the only honest gifts he had left. I pressed the pearls to my throat, felt no tears, only the steady pulse of a heart that had outlived disappointment. But before I could set the box aside, a question flickered. What becomes of a life rebuilt from ash and hymn once the past mails itself back to your doorstep? Keep listening, and I'll tell you how a banker's forged ledgers, a bookstore key, and a strand of contrition pearls converged to test the very peace I thought unbreakable. The morning after I stacked Calvin's suitcases on the porch, Roxbury woke to a hard frost that rimmed every mailbox like sugar on a donut. I stood at the kitchen window, fingers wrapped around a cup of chicory, and watched vapor rise from my breath. Across the street, Mrs. Leroy ushered grandbabies into a rumbling school bus. Life, it seemed, refused to pause simply because a marriage cracked down the center. Yet somewhere deeper than bone, I knew the next knock on my door would not be a neighbor borrowing nutmeg. It came at 9:30. 3 quick raps, polite but insistent. Calvin slid into the doorway, wearing yesterday's wrinkled suit. Eyes bloodshot, jaw shadowed. He smelled of cold air and desperation. "Eve, let me talk," he said, the words scraping like gravel. Behind him idled a taxi, meter running, future uncertain. He stepped inside, scanning the parlor as if gauging which memories were still his. The dealership called first thing. An envelope showed up with ledgers, my ledgers, signed in your hand. His voice quivered between accusation and plea. I set my cup down with deliberate calm. You forged my name, Calvin. You put me on debts I never owed. The statement hovered, heavy as wet wool. He rubbed his temples. If those papers go to the IRS, I could lose the job. They'll freeze everything. We'll both drown. I almost laughed, soft, incredulous. We? There hasn't been a we since you started wearing perfume that cost more than our mortgage. His shoulders sagged. Silence pooled between us, thick and dark. Then he tried the last tool of a desperate man. Tenderness remembered. Eve, baby, you still love me. I know you do. Love. The word felt foreign, like a hymn sung in the wrong key. I pictured Selena's little girl calling him daddy, pictured my mother's shawl draped over another woman's shoulders. The ache that rose was sharp, but behind it a strange clarity glimmered. I love the woman I'm becoming more, I said, surprised by my own steadiness, and she refuses to be your alibi. His mouth opened, closed. In that flutter of confusion, I glimpsed the boy he must once have been, clever, terrified of failure, convinced charm could outrun consequence. Pity brushed my heart, feather light before drifting away. I won't press charges if you walk away clean, I offered. Leave the house deed in my name, sign the divorce papers quietly, and whatever the tax man comes for, he'll come for you alone. A clock ticked louder than normal. Calvin stared at the floorboards where sun painted stripes through the blinds. At last he nodded, but not in surrender, in retreat. You'll hear from my lawyer, he murmured, and the door closed behind him with an exhausted sigh. Outside, his taxi pulled off, trailing a swirl of frost. I exhaled, long and slow, and felt the first draft of relief glide through my chest. Yet a whisper coiled beneath that relief. When a man like Calvin loses everything, he tends to search for someone to blame. 2 hours later, the phone rang. The dealership manager's clipped tone confirmed Calvin had been suspended pending investigation. He asked whether I had further records. I promised to send copies. My hand trembled as I replaced the receiver, but it wasn't fear. It was the pulse of a new identity beating to life. As evening settled, relatives filtered back to claim forgotten coats and pie pans. Gossip traveled with them like perfume on Sunday hats. Some eyes glimmered with sympathy, others with that pity I hated. I gathered empty dishes, let conversation wash over me, and refused to shrink. If people needed a cautionary tale, let them learn how a woman stands after her foundation quakes. When the last cousin waved goodbye, Darius stayed behind, wiping crumbs from the table. You did good, sis, he said, but earthquakes have aftershocks. He wasn't warning. He was bracing himself to catch me if I stumbled. I squeezed his hand. Then we braced together. In the hush that followed, an idea whispered. Fragile, thrilling. Maybe survival was only step one. Maybe reinvention waited just beyond the front gate. Monday brought 2 letters. The first, stamped with the Federal Eagle, announced a preliminary audit of Calvin Brooks and any jointly filed spouse. My stomach clenched, then eased. I'd expected as much. The second envelope came from Beacon Hill, a lawyer's letterhead crisp as starched linen. Calvin petitioned for mediation, citing marital assets. Heat pricked my cheeks. He still wanted a slice of a pie he'd tried to poison. I needed advice bigger than cousin chatter, so I dressed in my navy coat and walked to the black-owned bookstore on Blue Hill Avenue. Talbot and Sons, though the Sons had long since moved south. Mr. Talbot, gray-bearded and eagle-eyed, greeted me like family. Miss Evelyn, trouble sits on your shoulder. I explained, voice steady, that I sought work. Part-time clerk? Maybe Saturday readings for children. He listened, then asked the question no one else had. What do you want, child? The answer surprised us both. I want to teach. Words saved me as a girl. Maybe they can do it again. Mr. Talbot's smile folded soft wrinkles. He fetched a flyer for Boston University's adult education program, circled Dr. Nathan Price's course on African American literature. First class tomorrow evening. Go sit in the back. See if the fit feels right. Walking home, I realized I was humming, quiet but confident, something I hadn't done since before the disappearances began. The tune sifted through cold air like warm sand, and for a fleeting second I forgot audits, lawyers, and whispers, but trouble kept pace. At dusk, a police cruiser slowed in front of my house. 2 officers approached, respectful yet stern, and served me with a protective order notice filed by Calvin. He claimed harassment, theft of personal property, and threats of defamation. My laugh startled the officers. Bitterness tends to startle when it flowers in the throat. I signed the papers, thanked them for their courtesy, and closed the door on a chill that was no longer just November. Inside, I leaned against the wall, pulse drumming. Calvin's tactic was clear. If he couldn't reclaim his narrative, he'd paint me as the villain. For a heartbeat, self-doubt flickered. Was I villainous for exposing him? The flicker died. Truth does not require permission to stand upright. Still, the weight of reputation pressed. Roxbury's grapevine shredded nuance, and soon the congregation would hum with half-truths. I pictured pews tilting beneath judgmental whispers. Yet another image rose stronger, children, in Mr. Talbot's shop tracing fingers beneath words, eyes widening as stories unfurled. Which image fed my spirit? I chose the latter and let the former starve. That night, I drafted a letter to the IRS, enclosing every ledger copy and a signed statement. My pen moved with purpose, each period a nailed plank and a bridge toward daylight. Darius watched from the doorway, pride glinting behind worry. Calvin's gonna come out swinging, he said, so swing cleaner. I sealed the envelope and kissed it like a prayer. Tuesday evening, I wrapped a wool scarf around my neck and rode the Orange Line to Boston University. The campus buzzed with youth, voices rising like migrating geese. But the classroom I entered smelled of chalk dust and old paper, a comforting hush. I slipped into a back chair. Dr. Nathan Price strode in, tall, milk chocolate complexion, horn-rimmed glasses, framing eyes that missed nothing. He opened with Langston Hughes's Mother to Son, reciting Mama's crystal stairs and tacks in the dark. As he spoke, something in my chest unknotted, as if Hughes had written that poem for women who just mailed evidence to the IRS. Dr. Price saw me wiping a tear and offered a nod that felt like welcome home. Class ended, students filed out buzzing. I lingered, touching spines of anthologies. First time auditing? He asked, approach gentle. I admitted I hadn't sat at a desk since high school. He smiled. Education is less about desks, more about doorways. Seems you've already walked through one. He invited me back. I said I'd think on it, but Hope had already unpacked a suitcase in my rib cage. Leaving campus, I felt lighter, until headlights washed over me and a familiar Buick idled at the curb. Calvin rolled down the window, face lost to shadows. You running around, telling people lies, he growled. I kept walking. He matched my pace. Drop the audit, Eve. We can settle quiet. His persistence nipped like winter gusts. I stopped beneath a street lamp, its glow carving sharp lines on both our faces. The quiet you want, I said, sounds like silence over my own grave. I turned. The Buick door slammed, anger choking the night, but he didn't follow. Maybe the lamp lit his conscience, maybe just his fear of witnesses. On the train ride home, I thought of the protective order, the audit, the class, the Buick, all strands tugging at the tapestry of my future. Some threads threatened to unravel me, others promised richer patterns. Which would I nurture? Letters multiplied like winter birds. A notice from the bank revealed Calvin had withdrawn nearly every shared dollar 2 days before Thanksgiving. A pink slip arrived for our mortgage, payment overdue. He was draining reservoirs, betting I'd beg for a cup. Instead, I tightened my belt, sold my mother's china to a collector, and used the money to hire attorney Florence Green, a woman whose reputation for dismantling fraudulent husbands radiated through Dorchester courts like gospel organ chords. Miss Green reviewed my files, raised an eyebrow, and said, "He's playing checkers, Mrs. Harper. We'll play chess." Her confidence was tonic. She filed an emergency motion freezing any remaining marital assets and petitioned to lift Calvin's protective order on grounds of bad faith. Court date, 3 weeks. Between legal meetings, I clerked at Talbot and Sons, shelving Baldwin and Morrison, recommending Hughes to teenagers who'd never heard a river sing. Some evenings, I attended Dr. Price's class, scribbling notes until margins crowded with stars. Other nights, exhaustion wrapped me like wet canvas, yet even on those nights, I felt more alive than during all the silent Thanksgivings combined. One snowy Thursday, while closing the shop, Mr. Talbot handed me a parcel. No return label, just my name in Calvin's distinctive hand. My pulse spiked. Darius, stacking crates, moved closer. "Open it," he whispered. I nodded, tore the tape. Inside lay photographs. Me outside University Hall, me boarding the train, me laughing with Dr. Price over coffee. A note read, "Courts love evidence of adultery." My vision tunneled. The implication was absurd. Friendship reframed as sin, but scandal often chooses suggestion over fact. I steadied my breath. "He thinks fear will hurt me," I said. Darius's jaw tightened. "A hurt man with a camera is still just a man. We'll outshine the flash." I slid the photos back, tied the box with twine, and placed it on a high shelf labeled unsorted. Some images deserve obscurity, yet the threat lingered. I wondered what else Calvin might twist. At church the following Sunday, whispers coiled around pews. Sister Louise cornered me near the coats. "They say you embarrassed Calvin in front of his child. Is that Christian?" The question stung, not because I doubted my faith, but because rumor rarely waits for testimony. I took her hand, warm and papery, and said, "What's unchristian is letting a lie raise children in daylight." She didn't answer, but her grip softened. Choir practice ended with Reverend Carter requesting a word. In his office, he offered cedar-smelling silence. "Truth and mercy often wrestle," he began. "What do you need from your church family?" My throat tightened. Years of performing strength suddenly felt heavy. "Grace," I whispered, "and maybe a little room to breathe." He nodded, then prayed over me, each word threading warmth through the cold places inside. Walking home under street lamps haloed with snow, I sensed the narrative Calvin spun bumping into the story I was rewriting day by day. One of them would win. The outcome, I realized, rested less on court dates and more on whether I allowed shame to draft my sentences. Saturday dawn, Attorney Green called. We received bank footage, Mr. Brooks removing safety deposit contents last week. That key you found, he beat us to the box. My heart lurched. Did he take more? Papers mostly, but the clerk remembered a gunmetal envelope addressed to you. I inhaled sharply. A letter meant for me, now hidden by him. Attorney Green squared her tone. Courthouse will subpoena the footage. If that envelope surfaces, we'll seize it. Thunder of possibilities rolled through my mind: apology, threat, confession. Snow kept falling. Roxbury muffled its usual chatter under a white quilt. In that hush, I felt the story tipping toward climax. Every decision was a stitch pulling tighter: attend class or stay home, speak up or stay silent, trust God or trust fear. I chose class. Boston University's lecture halls glowed amber against snowbanks. Dr. Price began with Zora Neale Hurston's words: "There are years that ask questions and years that answer." My breath caught. 1969 had begun as a year of routine questions. Would the turkey brown evenly? Would Calvin charm the deacons? But it was ending as a year of scorching answers. During discussion, Dr. Price invited thoughts on survival narratives. I raised my hand, voice shaking but sure, and spoke of how a woman can stitch dignity from ripped seams. Classmates listened, eyes solemn. Dr. Price smiled, pride glinting like a struck match. Afterward, he walked me to the lobby. "Your insight today," he said, "that's scholarship." Heat spread in my cheeks. Not romantic, simply the warmth of being seen without judgment. He added, "Consider applying for the spring cohort, full tuition remission for community leaders." My instinct flinched. Calvin's silhouette still lurked, but then I pictured that missing envelope and sensed how tightly he gripped a narrative slipping away, so I nodded. "I'll apply." Outside, snowflakes feathered my coat. I lifted my face to the sky, let icy stars melt on my lashes, and understood that even blizzards cleanse. Yet as I boarded the train, a question darted quick as a sparrow. What message lay sealed in that gunmetal envelope, and would its silence roar before the gavel fell? I tucked the question beside my ticket stub, knowing it would follow me into the next chapter, where choices sharpen and secrets unravel in full daylight. Snow kept its silent siege on Roxbury for a full week, turning tree limbs into white rib bones against a pewter sky. I spent these mornings at my dining room table, papers fanned like tarot cards, court summonses, audit queries, tuition forms from Boston University, all competing for the same thin stack of dollars I'd managed to salvage before Calvin bled the accounts dry. Attorney Florence Green said strategy required patience. My gas bill suggested otherwise. Yet even in that pinch of scarcity, an unfamiliar spark insisted I look further than survival. One afternoon, the mailman delivered a single envelope, formal cream-embossed return address from Beacon Hill Family Court. Inside lay a motion Calvin's lawyer had filed to seize half the house for equitable distribution. The audacity landed like a slap, but anger found unexpected company. Determination took its arm. I copied the document, tucked the original into a folder marked "He can try," then dialed Florence. She laughed, a low, confident sound. "Let him ask for the moon," she said. "We'll calculate the clouds he pawned to get there." By evening, I was shelving books at Talbot and Sons, surreptitiously counting hours for next week's pay. Mr. Talbot noticed my distraction and pressed a fresh brewed coffee into my palm, steam curling like soft advice. "Any story worth telling," he murmured, "puts its heroine in a corner only she can paint her way out of." I nodded, sipping courage. As closing time neared, the shop bell tinkled, and Selina, the woman from Beacon Hill, stepped inside, shoulders hunched in a plum-colored coat. Darius, sweeping, froze mid-stroke. I met her gaze. It held more remorse than accusation. She approached the counter slowly, removing knit gloves. "I know I shouldn't be here," she began, voice feather thin, "but Calvin came by last night in a rage. He said you were ruining him." Her hands trembled as she reached into her purse and produced a small gunmetal envelope, the very one the bank clerk had described. He said it belonged to you, she whispered, but he couldn't bring himself to send it. She slid the envelope across the counter. My pulse hammered. Part of me wanted to tear it open, the other part feared what secret might unmoor me again. Why give it to me? I asked. Selena's eyes glistened. Because lies burnt my life once already. I refuse to let them scorch another woman's. Outside, streetlights haloed snowflakes as I walked home clutching the envelope. Each step pressed a question deeper. Would its contents dismantle Calvin or destabilize me? In the kitchen, I inhaled the scent of leftover chili, summoned courage, and slit the seal. A single handwritten letter unfolded, dated 2 months earlier. Evelyn. If you're reading this, the tapestry of my deceit has finally unraveled. I kept the threads too long. The doctors say my heart is failing. There's a chance I won't see spring. I set policies in motion to secure Selena and the child, but I forged your name because I feared you'd refuse. Fear is a coward's language. C. The page shook in my grip. Heart failure, insurance fraud explained, protective order explained. Yet another line sat below, scrawled hastily. A second policy lists you as beneficiary of everything, if you choose to claim it. Beneath, a safety deposit number. The vault he'd emptied still held another secret, one placed there for me. Questions swarmed. Was this contrition or manipulation? Could truth and trickery occupy the same dying breath? But one realization wove through the noise. Whichever way that policy tilted, Calvin's collapse would soon echo through Beacon Hill and Roxbury alike. I set the letter down beside the stove where chili simmered again, letting its steady bubbles remind me that life still offered small comforts amid sprawling riddles. 2 days later, Florence and I entered family court, a limestone building whose corridors smelled of dust and polished shoes. Calvin stood at the far end with his attorney, suit impeccably pressed, though his posture sagged. For the first time, I noticed gray feathering his temples. An usher led us into a wood-paneled chamber where the judge's bench loomed like a pulpit stripped of mercy hymns. Proceedings began with Calvin's petition for equitable distribution. His lawyer delivered a sermon on marital partnership, citing my voluntary unemployment. Florence countered with forensic accounting printouts that mapped Calvin's secret withdrawals like footprints across a snowfield. The judge's brow furrowed deeper with each page. Then came Calvin's protective order claim. His attorney waved photographs, those shots of me laughing with Dr. Price, asserting adultery. Florence rose, calm as still water, and asked the attorney to identify the photographer. He couldn't. She produced the police report of Calvin's late-night confrontation outside Boston University, reminding the bench that harassment cuts both ways. The judge requested evidence of threats. None appeared. Motion denied. Still, tension coiled when Calvin's lawyer referenced the newly discovered insurance policy naming both Selena and me. The judge scheduled a separate probate review, freezing policy funds until validity could be proven. Court recessed. Calvin approached, eyes hollow, lips forming my name like a plea, but Florence's hand on my elbow guided me away. In the hallway, adrenaline hummed beneath my skin. Florence whispered, "We scored points, but the game isn't over. That second policy could shift everything." I nodded, sensing momentum but wary of victory laps. Beside the exit, reporters with notepads hovered. Rumors of a double-life salesman made juicy copy. I stepped past flashbulbs, chin lifted, refusing to let scandal set my posture. Outside, sleet stung my cheeks. Dr. Price waited beneath the awning holding an umbrella big enough to shelter a small choir. "I heard court let out," he said. "Thought you might want company to the train." Gratitude unfolded in my chest, gentle, unassuming. We walked toward the station, his umbrella creating a small world of dry space and shared breath. "What happens if the policy is real?" he asked. I considered. Then Calvin tried to buy forgiveness with money he didn't own. We reached the steps. A gust flipped my scarf. Dr. Price pressed a gloved hand to my shoulder. "Whatever the account holds, it can't measure your worth." The sincerity settled over me warmer than any wool. I boarded the train as doors chimed, heart strangely light despite court's weight. That night I met Darius at the kitchen table, letters and legal pads spread like constellations. "Judge froze funds," I explained. He whistled low. "So we wait?" "We prepare." We drafted testimony, cataloged every receipt, and planned for university tuition, even if policy funds never cleared. Around midnight, wind howled against the windows, yet inside, the lamp cast a brave circle of light where siblings map tomorrow. A week later, I sat in Reverend Carter's office, polishing bulletins for Sunday service. He watched me over rimless glasses. "Whispers have softened," he observed. "Truth travels slower than rumor, but it's heavier. Eventually it settles." The reassurance seeped into my bones. Still, I sensed another storm brewing. The probate hearing loomed, and with it, the envelope's promise of money I wasn't sure I wanted. That evening, Calvin called from a hospital ward. Machines beeped faintly in the background, each tone marking distance between past and present. "Heart's worse than they thought," he said, voice gravel thin. "I need you to drop the audit. The stress—" His words faded into static. Compassion brushed me, brief, conflicted. "I won't weaponize your illness," I answered, "but I won't shield wrongdoing either." Silence echoed, then a brittle sigh. "Fair enough." Hospitals awaken old grief. Mama died in one, twilight seeping through blinds while hymns played on a cassette. I spent that night praying for clarity rather than an outcome. Toward dawn, a resolve surfaced, gentle and firm. I would attend the probate hearing, claim whatever funds legally belonged to me, and funnel a portion into scholarships for Roxbury girls who dream beyond laundry lines. Calvin's betrayal would finance futures he never imagined. Probate court convened on a cold Tuesday. The clerk produced 2 policies. The first, forged, named Selena and her child as beneficiaries of assets Calvin no longer possessed. The second, dated later, bore my legitimate signature. Calvin had traced it from an old birthday card, expert analysis confirmed. The judge ruled the forged signature void, but allowed the policy to stand because the premiums had cleared from Calvin's private accounts. Funds would release to me once estate debt settled, reporters scribbled. Selena, seated 2 rows behind, exhaled audible relief. Her daughter's college fund safe thanks to Calvin's earlier accounting. I approached her afterward. "Your child deserves stability," I said. "If my payout exceeds tuition, consider some of it yours." Tears traced her cheeks. "Why would you?" I answered honestly, "Because healing multiplies when divided." Outside, cameras flashed. Someone shouted, "Miss Harper, will you forgive your husband?" I paused. The question seemed simple, but contained entire landscapes. "Forgiveness isn't a door I walk through for someone else," I replied. "It's the house I choose to live in myself." Pens scratched furiously. Headlines would spin. I hailed a cab, ready to write chapters reporters could never fit in print. Cab windows blurred with sleet as we rolled toward Blue Hill Avenue, and I realized a season had turned inside me. Not from winter to spring, that would come in time, but from fracture to framework. Betrayal had sprayed my life into shards. Now those shards caught light in new ways, forming stained glass visions of possibility. The driver hummed Sam Cooke's "A Change Is Gonna Come." I hummed along, voice steady, harmonizing with the future growing louder by the mile. As I stepped onto my porch, university acceptance letter awaited in the mailbox, full tuition confirmed. I pressed the envelope to my heart, snow swirling like confetti around the porch lamp. Behind me, windows glowed amber, each pane reflecting a woman still becoming, and somewhere a quiet question rose. When the next Thanksgiving arrived, whose stories would fill my table and what song would I lead them in singing? I didn't know the melody yet, but I could already feel its rhythm, strong, unbroken, ready to carry Chapter 4 into a pitch I had never dared before. Winter loosened its grip on Roxbury in small, reluctant gestures, icicles thinning to glass threads, gutters gurgling with meltwater, children tossing snowballs that broke apart like sighs. By March, I was commuting to Boston University 4 nights a week, wearing secondhand wool and a confidence that fit almost as snug. Daylight still ducked behind buildings before my evening train arrived, yet inside those lecture halls I felt sunlit. Dr. Price's literature cohort numbered 23, most young enough to treat late-night pizza like a food group. But they listened when I spoke about Zora's porch sitters or Baldwin's broken fathers. Sometimes they asked how I understood such layers. I'd smile, thinking of a forged ledger and an envelope of confession, and answer that experience could be a brutal but thorough teacher. Money flowed in at last from Calvin's validated policy. After debts cleared, a sturdy sum remained, enough to tempt vanity. Instead, I divided it the way one breaks communion bread. A quarter to Selena's daughter's 529 college plan, a quarter into a scholarship endowment for literacy students at Nubian Square, and the remainder into a modest account that bore my maiden initials, E.M. Harper, because a woman reborn deserves to sign her own checks. Bank tellers addressed me as Miss Harper now. The title no longer felt like a correction but an invitation. Still, not every corner of my life gleamed so clean. Church elders debated whether to invite Calvin back for prayer after open-heart surgery was scheduled. Some argued for grace, others flinched at scandals in Sunday headlines. I sat through the meeting quiet as a sealed jar, listening to words pass over me like wind over wheat. Inside, questions sprouted. Could I forgive a man whose betrayal financed my new beginnings? Was forgiveness an act of mercy or self-defense? And if I withheld it, would bitterness siphon nourishment from my roots? Answers hid themselves until one Wednesday near dusk when Reverend Carter phoned. Calvin had collapsed during a stress test and been rushed into surgery 2 days early. "He's asking for you," the pastor said. My heart stuttered as though echoing Calvin's failing pulse. I thanked Reverend Carter and promised to pray. After hanging up, I sat at the kitchen table tracing the wood grain patterns, watching daylight flicker through blinds like a shutting eyelid. Darius entered, coat half zipped, saw my face and pulled up a chair. I told him the news. He whistled softly. "You gonna go?" he asked. The question flapped in the silence between us. Going meant opening doors I'd barricaded. Not going meant letting a man's final image of me be courtroom steel. I pictured Calvin on a hospital bed, tubes weaving into his chest like remorse made visible. Whether pity or duty moved me, I wasn't sure, but a sentence crystallized. I need to look him in the eyes one more time, if only to own the woman I've become. I tucked Dr. Price's evening reading into my bag, Toni Morrison's discourse on mercy, and headed toward a Massachusetts general beneath a sky bruised purple. Each footstep felt heavier the closer I got, not with dread, but with the gravity of choosing empathy over anger. The cardiac wing hummed with machinery translating fragile lives into beeps and glowing lines. Outside Calvine's room, a nurse spoke in whispers explaining visitor rules. I sanitized my hands and inhaled sterile air that carried faint notes of antiseptic and something lonelier. Then the door slid aside, and I stepped into a hush so deep it pressed against my eardrums. Calvin lay partly elevated, skin the color of damp clay, lips cracked as drought soil. A ventilation cannula threaded beneath his nose. Every breath sounded negotiated. He opened his eyes. 2 gray stones suddenly wet with recognition. Eve. My name emerged raspy yet unmistakable, the syllable curling like smoke from a dying wick. I moved to the bedside, resting gloved fingers on the rail. The last time we'd been this close, a courthouse corridor buzzed between us. Now machines mediated our silence. For several heartbeats, we simply looked, his gaze mapping a wife remade, mine absorbing a husband dismantled. Finally, he spoke again, each word pushing like winter through a stuck window. I signed papers. Lawyer will send. Whatever's left is yours. I shook my head gently. I don't want spoils, Calvin. I want truth. His eyelids fluttered. Truth is I loved. Admiration more than family. Thought gifts would keep everyone happy. Cough seized him. Alarms blipped. I pressed the call button. A nurse adjusted medication, offering me a sympathetic nod that said, "We see this, man versus consequence, every shift." When quiet resumed, I leaned closer. You forged my name, planned my erasure, yet you also left a policy for me. Which is the real Calvin? His eyes shone like wet gravel. Both, he whispered. A liar can still feel guilt. Tears pooled, one sliding down his temple. Seeing it, something inside me softened. Not absolution, perhaps, but recognition that complexity dwells where villains and victims bleed the same red. I reached for his hand, cool, papery, pulse skipping under thin skin. I release you, I said, surprise warming the words. Not because you earned it, but because I refuse to carry this weight any longer. His shoulders sagged as though shackles unseen fell away. Breath came easier, machines quieting. He squeezed my hand once, faint but deliberate. The next half hour we spoke sparely. He asked about Roxbury. I told him the scholarship fund would bear his mother's maiden name, honoring roots neither of us had watered well. He managed a fragile smile. At shift change, nurses requested visitors step out. I stood, smoothing my coat. Goodbye, Calvin. He shut his eyes, a single tear tracing downward. Whether it expressed regret or relief, I might never know. In the corridor, Reverend Carter waited, hat in hand. A hard visitation, he murmured. I nodded. We walked together to the lobby where marble echoed footsteps back at us sharper than spoken thoughts. Reverend halted near the chapel door, invited prayer. Inside, stained glass bathed pews in sapphire and amber, light pooling like quiet mercy across the floor. We knelt. He prayed for healing, comfort, and the courage to accept whichever arrived first. I whispered amen, and in that exhale felt an interior click, like a door swung wider inside my rib cage, letting light fill rooms long kept dim. Exiting the hospital, I dialed Dr. Price, voice steadier than I expected. He offered to meet for coffee at the 24-hour diner near campus. Snow had returned, flakes spiraling under street lamps. Inside the diner, students crammed booths, cradling textbooks, and bottomless mugs. We found a corner table. I relayed hospital details. Dr. Price listened, chin propped on interlaced fingers. When I finished, he asked, "How do you feel?" I searched for a tidy answer but found only layers: exhaustion, liberation, sorrow, an odd flicker of hope. Like a field after harvest, I said finally. cut down but ready for new seed. He smiled, that quiet professor smile suggesting a lesson both learned and admired. "Then let's talk spring planting when you're ready," he replied. I felt warmth rise from my coffee cup into my palms, spreading outward. Spring announced itself 3 weeks later with crocuses daring through crusted snow. Calvin survived surgery but remained fragile. Selena updated me via brief calls. I reciprocated with notes on scholarship progress, neither of us dwelling on the tangled history that bound our futures. Roxbury, meanwhile, buzzed with anticipation for the church's annual Resurrection Sunday program, where choirs from 4 neighborhoods joined voices. Reverend Carter asked me to give the testimonial message, a 5-minute reflection bridging scripture and lived experience. The request both humbled and rattled me. 5 minutes could hold a lifetime if words landed true. I prepared by walking Roxbury's side streets at dawn, letting memories rise with steam from manhole covers, linen curtains drifting summer breezes, Calvin twirling keys before those time disappearances, Darius humming spirituals while painting porch rails. Each recollection arrived less like a wound, more like a thread, evidence of a tapestry still in progress. Scholarship applications poured in, handwritten essays from women balancing night shifts, and diaper changes while dreaming of nursing degrees from men recently paroled, pledging to mentor youth so fewer saw prison bars. Reading their stories, I realized betrayal's broken currency had been converted into hope's legal tender. In that exchange, my own healing accelerated. The Saturday before Resurrection Sunday, I visited Talbot and Sons to hand Mr. Talbot the first scholarship award letters for photocopying. He read one aloud, voice trembling. A 61-year-old grandmother enrolling in GED classes because she wanted to read the Bible without glasses and guesswork. He folded the letter carefully. "Legacy is not what we leave for people," he said, "but what we place inside them." I tucked the phrase into my testimony draft. That evening, a call came from the hospital. Calvin had developed complications. Selena's voice shook. "He's asking if you can visit, maybe tomorrow." My pulse quickened, but Sunday obligations loomed. "I'll come Monday," I promised. Guilt pricked, yet purpose anchored. Sometimes ministry requires holding the living even while the dying wait. Sunlight spilled through stained glass the next morning, painting the sanctuary floor in jewel-tone mosaics. The combined choir, clad in white and gold, raised a hymn so full the rafters vibrated. When Reverend Carter invited me to the lectern, my knees tingled, but fear didn't win. I spoke of fields lying fallow, of seeds buried in darkness that still reach for light, of mistakes fertile enough to grow futures if tilled with honesty. I shared how a forged ledger became a scholarship, how forgiveness freed more oxygen than anger ever could. Faces glistened, some nodded. A baby laughed on a mother's lap exactly when I said, "New life sounds like unexpected joy." After service, congregants pressed my hands, thanked me, offered pound cake slices wrapped in foil. Amid the bustle, I spotted Dr. Price leaning against a column, eyes bright. He mouthed, "Proud of you." The words settled warm as a shawl. Monday morning, I took the Orange Line to Massachusetts General. Calvin's room smelled of antiseptic and lilacs. Someone had placed a vase on his bedside table. He looked smaller, skin drawn taut over cheekbones. Selena stepped back to give us privacy. Calvin blinked awake, managed a faint smile. "You preached?" he asked, voice airy. I nodded, told him the gist. Moisture brightened his eyes. "You always did have a pulpit in your heart." He gestured weakly toward a folder on the nightstand. Inside lay papers transferring title of our Roxbury house solely to me, notarized the morning after our court hearing. "Didn't want you fighting anymore," he whispered. Gratitude and sorrow threaded through me. I placed a hand over the folder. "Thank you," I said, surprised at the gentleness. We talked sporadically. About the garden he once promised to build, about the girl he called daughter twice, about how pride can bankrupt a soul faster than any IRS bill. Before leaving, I read Psalm 23, voice steady, and he closed his eyes, mouthing words like a man memorizing light. When I finished, he exhaled a whisper, "Restored." I squeezed his hand, not ownership or apology, merely human continuum, then slipped into the hallway where Selena waited, tears streaking. She hugged me, and in that embrace 2 women reinforced a bridge built from splinters. Outside, April wind carried a faint scent of hyacinths, and for one fragile moment I tasted both past and future, bittersweet, inseparable. At the bus stop, I opened my notebook, crossed out the last line of my testimony draft. In its place I wrote, "The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone." Evening draped Roxbury in lavender haze as I reached home. Darius sat on the porch railing, guitar in hand, strumming an old Sam Cooke tune. He paused, searching my face. I told him Calvin had given the house over. Darius nodded, eyes soft. "Then this porch is yours to paint whatever color you want." I leaned against the railing, listening to guitar strings tell stories older than betrayal, younger than rebirth. In the quiet between chords, I felt Thanksgiving's ghost stir. Not the ghost of Calvin's disappearances, but the promise of a future gathering where every seat at my table would hold a storyteller, each dish seasoned with second chances. Yet the final ingredient lingered. I still had to decide how to live in a house that once echoed with secrets. That decision, I knew, would greet me like dawn at the edge of Chapter 5, where the last debts of memory would finally fall due. April's final week arrived with magnolia petals twirling along Warren Street like tiny pink kites. Inside my house, now legally, undeniably mine, the silence felt gentler. Old floorboards no longer creaked under the memory of Calvin's shoes. They greeted my steps like friends who had been waiting for the right voice to fill the rooms. Yet ownership came threaded with unfinished business. The call arrived just after dawn on a Thursday, painted gold by rising sun. Calvin's heart had surrendered during the night. Selena's voice, though steady, carried a tremor that rippled through my chest. She said the hospital chaplain was preparing final rites, asked if I wished to see him before the body went to the funeral home. I closed my eyes, listening to the still house, and pictured Calvin's last exhale mingling with a machine steady sigh. Grief didn't strike like a lightning bolt. It seeped in, slow as groundwater, carrying silt and questions. I told Selena I would come. On the drive, I wondered whether sorrow could coexist with the relief of Chapter's closing. Roxbury streets blurred past, trees leafing in tender green, life insisting on forward motion. At the hospital, I found Selena seated beside the bed, her daughter clutching a teddy bear. Calvin lay composed, facial muscles slack in a peace I hadn't seen for years. Standing there, I realized anger had been busy vacating its room in my heart, leaving behind a vacancy where compassion could unpack. Selena rose, whispered that she and the child would step into the corridor. I took the chair she vacated. Memories fluttered. Calvin dancing at our wedding. Calvin whistling in the driveway. Calvin's back retreating down a Beacon Hill sidewalk, with my mother's shawl draped over his arm. My fingers brushed the sheet near his hand. I spoke aloud. voice barely above sigh. I choose to remember the man who once believed in better versions of both of us. The air felt warmer, as if the words themselves carried heat. Afterward, I guided Selena through paperwork, ensuring the burial costs came from Calvin's remaining personal funds, not hers. We arranged a modest service at a Beacon Hill chapel. Roxbury friends questioned my decision to attend, but I told them closure deserves witnesses. On the day of the funeral, pews filled with salesmen in dark suits, parishioners from Warren Street, and a contingent of Boston University students who came to support me. Dr. Price slipped into the row behind mine, his presence an anchor. When the minister invited reflections, I walked to the lectern. Hearts leaned forward, expecting anger or tearful devotion. Instead, I offered a story about table building, how Calvin once spent a Saturday sanding pine boards so smooth they felt like satin, determined to leave no splinter for guests who might lean on it. We are all carpenters of memory, I concluded. Sometimes we carve regret, sometimes redemption. The wood tells the whole sum. Faces glistened, tears mingling with reluctant smiles. As I returned to my seat, weight lifted. A long clenched fist inside me slowly unfurled. After the burial, rain tamped down the earth as if to pat a child to sleep. Selena thanked me, then asked what I would do now. I heard myself say, teach people to read their own stories before someone else writes them. Her daughter reached up, touched my hand, and said she wanted to write stories one day. Purpose flared bright as lightning. The scholarship fund would bear Calvin's name and a footnote, forged in error, reborn in hope. That evening, back on Warren Street, Darius grilled fish on the porch despite drizzle. We ate under the awning, rain singing on the tin roof. He studied me across the small table. You look lighter, sis, like you put down a suitcase you forgot you were carrying. I thought of the dirt settling over Calvin's casket and nodded. Some journeys end only when forgiveness arrives, even if forgiveness wears grief's coat. The smoke spiraled upward, carrying something like blessing into night air. Summer unraveled like bright ribbon. Boston University granted me admission to the formal degree program, tuition, covered by both scholarship funds and an anonymous donation I suspected traced back to Dr. Price. I balanced coursework with bookstore shifts and weekly meetings at the community center, where the scholarship committee gathered. We reviewed essays beneath ceiling fans that clacked like metronomes, measuring the tempo of new beginnings. Renovation of my house progressed in parallel. With Darius and a crew of church volunteers, we converted the unused parlor into a reading lounge, shelves rescued from a closing library, armchairs reupholstered in paisley fabric that reminded me of my mother's Sunday dresses, lamps tall enough to let words sparkle on the page. On Saturdays, neighborhood children trekked in clutching comic books and summer school packets. The room filled with the rustle of pages and occasional bursts of triumphant laughter when tough sentences finally relinquished meaning. One humid afternoon, while I reorganized a stack of donated biographies, a small boy named Isaiah tugged my sleeve. "Miss Evelyn, why you do all this for us?" Sunlight caught motes of dust spinning between us like tiny galaxies. I knelt to his eye level and answered, "Because someone once forgot to see my story, I never want you to feel unseen." He grinned, revealing missing front teeth, then darted off toward the lemonade pitcher. My chest felt as though a candle had been lit behind my sternum, its flame steady and bright. Rumors, of course, persisted like gnats. Some neighbors whispered that I used funeral money to buy goodwill. Others speculated on my friendship with Dr. Price. The first rumor withered when scholarship recipients began posting college acceptance letters in the church vestibule. The second rumor I left to flower, paying it little mind until August, when Dr. Price invited me to dinner at a waterside cafe near the Charles River. Evening sun melted into ripples of gold on the water's surface. Dr. Price wore a linen jacket, apologized if the choice of restaurant felt extravagant. I assured him simplicity lived wherever intent was honest. We talked about literature, about the upcoming fall semester, about the way students' faces light up when they realize Baldwin is still talking to them across time. Dessert arrived. Peach cobbler with cinnamon ice cream, and as we shared it, he reached across the table, hand warm and tentative. "You've carried heavy weather," he said softly, "but I see the sky clearing." I felt a breeze off the river, and for the first time in years its cool felt welcoming, not bracing. Walking back to the subway, he asked if we could navigate the coming months together. No rush, just shared chapters. I thought of the porch, still needing a coat of paint, of scholarship lists yet to finalize, of research papers looming, and answered that journeys are better when the map includes companionship. He laughed, a sound like pages riffled by wind, and we parted with the promise of next Tuesday's lecture and Thursday's coffee. September brought crisp mornings, leaves gilded Roxbury sidewalks in bronze and amber. On the first day of classes, I stood at the front of Dr. Price's seminar, invited to read an opening passage. My voice rode the silence with confidence once unimaginable. Somewhere mid-paragraph, I noticed students leaning in, eyes reflecting recognition. It occurred to me that telling stories was another form of porch building, and I was laying plank after plank. After class, Dr. Price and I strolled across the quad. He spoke of a community engagement grant the university offered. With my experience, he believed we could secure funding to expand literacy programs citywide. The scope felt vast, but ambition no longer scared me. We agreed to draft the proposal together over sweet tea and annotated bibliographies. That night, I returned home to find Selena and her daughter on the porch steps holding a bouquet of asters. They came to thank me for the college fund paperwork now finalized. The girl handed me a hand-drawn card, 2 houses joined by a rainbow bridge. Inside, she'd written, "Stories keep us connected." I invited them in for peach tea, and the evening unfolded like gently turning pages. Thanksgiving rolled around again, marking 1 full year since Calvin's last disappearance. Dawn found me in the kitchen, apron dusted with flour, humming a hymn older than my earliest memory. The turkey roasted, mac and cheese bubbled, collard greens perfumed the house with smoked turkey neck. Yet the soundtrack of this day differed. Children's giggles drifted from the reading lounge where they watched holiday cartoons, and from the porch came the scrape of Darius setting up extra chairs. At noon, the doorbell chimed in earnest. Scholarship students lugged casseroles. Bookstore patrons delivered pies. Selena brought candied yams. Dr. Price carried twin paper bags, one filled with pecan sweet potato biscuits, the other with first edition poetry books for the house library. Even Sister Louise, once skeptical, arrived with cranberry relish and a tentative grin. We circled a dining table extended with borrowed leaves. Folding chairs outnumbered heirloom ones, and mismatched tablecloth edges met in cheerful imperfection. Reverend Carter offered grace. During the prayer, I peeked. Faces of varied shade and age bowed within reach of one bowl, as if God had drawn a wide circle and said, "All y'all fit." Gratitude swelled so full it pressed tears against my closed eyelids. Conversation wove between bites. The boy Isaiah reciting new vocabulary, a grandmother praising her GED classmate, scholarship recipients trading dorm stories. Between laughter, I caught Dr. Price watching me with quiet pride. When plates emptied, Darius fetched his guitar, strummed chords that made hips sway and memories spark. Someone asked for a story, and the room stilled, expectant. I told them about my mother's shawl, how a single piece of yarn can unravel many illusions, yet when rewoven becomes stronger. I spoke of Calvin without bitterness, acknowledging faults and gifts alike. I shared that forgiveness does not erase hurt, but builds a bridge sturdy enough for truth to walk across without fear. Listeners leaned closer as if the table itself wished to hear better. Later, as sunset painted the sky copper, children chased one another in the yard while adults packed leftovers. I stepped onto the porch alone for a moment, sweater pulled tight. Last year, I had stood in roughly the same spot watching Calvin drive away into a future that no longer included me. Now I looked out on porch lights illuminating laughter, guitars, scholarship flyers pinned to the bulletin board inside, and a future wide enough to include everyone gathered. Dr. Price joined me, holding 2 mugs of spiced cider. We watched a V formation of geese sweep overhead, their honks fading into distance. He asked what I saw when I imagined next year. I considered. A university grant approved, more shelves in the lounge, perhaps a modest wedding in the church garden, though I kept that last thought tucked between heartbeats. Instead of predictions, I offered a reflection. Some seasons give us questions, others wait for us to answer. I think the year ahead will ask new questions, and for once I'm not afraid. He clinked his mug against mine. Then let's promise to keep listening. Inside, a timer chimed. Peach cobbler ready. We returned to the glow of kitchen light where children's hands reached eagerly for dessert plates. I watched the ladle dip into sweet fruit, watched crust crack, to reveal steam swirling upward like a benediction. As night settled, chairs stacked, guests departed with foil-wrapped blessings. Isaiah hugged me, whispering that he'd finished his first full book without help. Selena squeezed my hand, eyes bright. Darius slung his guitar case and promised paint for the porch rail first thing Saturday. Dr. Price lingered last, helping rinse dishes. He dried his hands, then asked if I'd walk him to the gate. Under starlight, he said 2 words simple as breath, "Thank you." I laughed, shook my head. No. Thank this whole crooked miracle for turning us into page-turners instead of footnotes. He kissed my forehead, leaving the promise of a different kiss for some future chapter. Neither of us needed to rush. House quiet again. I sat in the lounge, lamplight pooling over stacked library cards awaiting tomorrow's visitors. I breathed in the mingled scent of old paper and cinnamon, listening to the radiators click like typewriter keys finishing a line. On the mantel, the Thanksgiving photo we'd taken a few hours earlier already rested in a frame. Faces pressed together, every smile an open parentheses inviting whatever came next. I thought back to that rigid November afternoon a year ago. The Buick gliding away, the weight of discovered deceit. The memory no longer stung. It served as a mile marker proving the distance traveled. Forgiveness, education, community. Each had layered itself like quilt squares over the thin blanket of survival until thriving felt downright cozy. Midnight. Neared. I rose, clicked off the lamp. In the doorway I paused, whispering into the hush. Light gets in where the cracks are. Thank you for every crack. The walls, freshly painted a soft dawn yellow, held the words, and somehow I felt them nod. Upstairs, moonlight peered through curtains. I slid between cool sheets, heartbeat steady. Outside, leaves rustled, carrying the hushed promise of another day's lessons yet unwritten but already swelling with possibility. I closed my eyes, surrendering to sleep with one final thought. Stories are not endings. They are seeds. And this house, this life, these pages still turning beneath my chest, every one of them has room for gardens I haven't even dreamed. Tomorrow, the porch will smell of fresh paint and new chapters. Tonight, dawn is already on its way, taking attendance.